So who exactly is Jon K. Uler in terms of his professional background, his qualifications and his competence? And also, who is he as a person? And what is he truly like behind the scenes? Well, according to some very persistent and twisted LGBTQ radical activists, one of whom is a rather sophisticated, closeted, cross-dressing sexual deviant, which has been referred to these days as an AGP, an autogynephile, who reviews and gives thumbs up to sexually deviant books for minors to read in schools.
Matthew Osborne said this book is appropriate for children in middle school, as featured on GenSpec's website.
My penis can't erect. A guy touching it triggers pain. Orgasms feel like there's no climax at all. Just a sensation of fluid coming out.
Who is into deviant homosexual BDSM and has multiple fake Twitter accounts to troll for minors online toward the end of grooming them and introducing young males to the world of sissification by means of the Transmaxing Manifesto. The other LGBTQ activist who has been targeting John Uler to silence his bold stance in protection of women and vulnerable minors against sexual predators is uniquely deviant in her own right. She was actually found guilty and sanctioned by her own professional ethics board for her use of deception, as she was holding herself out as being more qualified than she actually is. Unbelievable, really. These two uniquely twisted radical LGBTQ activists have aggressively pushed the deceptive notion of trans to strategically manipulate the parents of gender-confused minors toward gaining access to such minors to groom them, all while pushing the pro-pedophile agenda, which has as its goals the normalizing or destigmatizing of pedophilia, lowering the age of consent, the further decriminalization of sexual contact by adults who perpetrate upon children, and decreasing the criminal penalties and length of incarceration for sex offenders. It is these two sexually deviant LGBTQ activists who set out to craft, to manufacture, and to push a fictitious, false, and slanderous narrative about Jon K. Uler, as they absolutely hate that he is using his forensic clinical background and insights from years of working as a sex offender treatment professional to educate the public about the minds, motives, and methods of the most sophisticated of predators. And in order to reinforce their false narrative, they managed to assemble a select group of equally deceptive and morally bankrupt band of flying monkeys who also have as their goal the sliming, slandering and harming of John Uler, both professionally and personally, to silence him and cancel his important and unapologetic message of protecting women and minors from sexual and financial predators. Together, these darkened souls have attempted to assert that John is someone who knows nothing about sexual predators, that he has fabricated and inflated his professional background and experience for his own self-aggrandizement, and is a horrible person behind the scenes to anyone who encounters him, which would include his own children. Again, all in an effort to silence him, to cancel him, and to dissuade people from listening to his professional insights and warnings about the kinds of sophisticated predators who use the LGBTQ and trans movement to access minors and to ensure they can deflect the public's attention away from the many red flags they themselves so clearly manifest. This particular LGBTQ closeted AGP activist morphed into his current twisted state because of the significant amount of pornography he has consumed over the years, which has taken him well beyond his previous level of accessing warped and vile homoerotic material, taken him beyond accessing barely legal, and even well beyond accessing bestiality porn, which is one of the reasons he no doubt secretly enjoys engaging in furries, where he can hide 100% of his identity underneath his bright and deceptive mascot-like costume while accessing kids who think furries is a safe activity for minors. He has moved deeper into deviance to where he now accesses online material via secret virtual private network, where he can connect and share with other equally twisted and deviant males, which has caused him to morph into a not-so-covert minor attracted person, or a MAP, which is simply an attempt at rebranding and airbrushing over pedophilia. Despite such a smear and slander campaign, John Uler has allowed his work to speak for itself in terms of his extensive professional knowledge and experience, as well as his many podcast episodes and interviews to paint an accurate picture of who he is in terms of his care and concern for those who would be targeted by perpetrators, and the content and volume of his work, which includes his multiple websites and podcast programs. John's content has been most revealing and illuminating about his professional background and the extent of his knowledge of the subjects he addresses, which is exactly why these particular cowardly radical activists have dogged his steps for years, doing what they could to dox him, to harm him personally and professionally, doing all they could do to slime him, slander him, and have him cancelled in so many different ways and on so many levels, instead of taking him up on his offer to debate him publicly. Knowing they could not debate him, they elected to go after him personally by means of crafting a slanderous smear campaign.
The red flags around John Uler, Part 1 and Part 2. How John Uler put his family behind him. Part 2 of our investigation into this safeguarding expert.
Well, John Uhler's son, Reed, had enough of seeing his good father slimed by such LGBTQ deviants and their twisted little flying monkeys, and had heard enough of the outright lies and slander of his dad, that he decided to make a number of videos in defense of his father to unmask the lies crafted by the deviant radicals and the rest of the slimy deceivers. The following is an excerpt from one of those videos where Reed speaks with authority and actual first-hand knowledge and experience about who their father is and what their upbringing was really like.
Hey there, this is Reed, and I'm Jon Uhler's son, and I wanted to put together this video just to give my perspective about what's been going on, and mostly just to talk about my own experiences and my memories of what it was like growing up in our household. And I should mention there has been someone online who's taken one of my videos that I used to use on a different account. So just so you know, that's not my account, and people have taken that and are trying to impersonate me. So what I say in this video, these are my actual thoughts. I'm not going to respond specifically to the specific accusations, because some of them are just out there.
This is the dimension of imagination. It is an area which we call the Twilight Zone.
South Carolina is investigating John Uler. And so are we. Part 1 in a series. 7 red flags that detransitioners cannot unsee in John Uler, and everyone should examine for themselves. Matt and Exelancic discuss the red flags around John Uler. The John Uler demolition zone. More people come forward with their stories. John Uler stealth edits a video to hide false professional membership claims. Because our reporting has been solid. The red flags around John Uler, Part 1 and Part 2. How John Uler put his family behind him. Part 2 of our investigation into this safeguarding expert.
Yeah, I've seen some of the things and the accusations that people have been saying online. Some of them are just out there. I wrote some things down just to help me remember, just to kind of jog my memory and give me some specifics to talk about as a kid, whether it was just good memories in general or specific. I wrote down a lot of stuff to do with my dad just to show how involved he was, especially compared to a lot of dads I would definitely say he was the most involved dad that I know. I just wanted to add, I am in complete disagreement with what's being put out there about my dad, and I believe this is happening because he is on the side of good and not evil, and he is making a lot of people accountable. So people are trying to find as much dirt on him as possible. I'm proud of the work he's doing. It's tough work that not a lot of people want to do, exposing abuse. So people are trying to expose him, find dirt on him. So that's my view. And yeah, let's get into it. So I wrote some things down just to help me remember, just to kind of jog my memory and give me some specifics to talk about as a kid, whether it was just good memories in general or specific. I wrote down a lot of stuff to do with my dad just to show how involved he was, especially compared to a lot of dads. I would definitely say he was the most involved dad that I know, and I would strive to be like him as a dad myself. What else? I mentioned the dirt bike path. Yeah, that was everything I'd written down. But in terms of, so those were just some examples I wanted to give of what it was like as a kid, because it was a while back. So that's why I wanted to write some of these down, just to remind myself, like, yeah, what was it like as a kid? What were some of the memories I had just in general, and specifically with my dad involved? Because, yeah, I've seen some of the things and the accusations that people have been saying online about my dad, and I wanted to say personally that I am proud to be his son, and he is the most involved dad I've known. And he did put in a lot of effort as a dad, as a husband. He was very faithful. He was very family focused and very hard worker, family involved in the family. It was a good childhood, had some very good experience. I would definitely say he was the most involved dad that I know, and I would strive to be like him as a dad myself. I've made this specifically so my dad can share it, and just so you have another perspective there.
So you can see why such LGBTQ deviants hate John Uler so much, as he has been using his professional forensic clinical experience, having worked with sexual perpetrators and predators for years, to unmask the minds, motives, and methods of perpetrators toward helping the public and parents understand how predators have been using the myth of trans to gain direct access to vulnerable minors, to groom them, along with their own ability to boldly lie and adeptly spin a false narrative. They managed to locate a number of equally twisted and deceptive individuals, a couple of whom being disgruntled former deceptive and unethical business associates of John's, who hate that John unmasked them as simply the scam artists for who they are. One being a grand fraud and schemer who was caught red-handed plagiarizing John's professional materials, unethically profiting off John's own intellectual property, and secretly bilking their non-profit ministry by quietly writing multiple sizable personal checks to himself from the ministry's financial account. This fraudster and wolf in sheep's clothing, who deceptively and adeptly masquerades as a Christian pastor and poses as a survivor advocate, is nothing more than a slick con artist, just like his deceptive criminal father, and this would also include his equally manipulative and deceptive mother. Another of the darkened souls would be a professional-grade snake oil salesman who runs a slick insurance agency who targets churches, including his own church, in order to solicit business from lower-educated, simple farm folk, who masquerades as a church elder, yet he is simply a wily opportunist looking for an easy target of opportunity in churches.
And we want to be your neighbor. I tell people I'm 86% neighbor, 12% educator, and just 2% salesperson. I just need the logins to the companies to get you the coverage you want. But more importantly is that you understand that coverage And most important is you're understanding it from someone you have grown to trust and who you know has your best interest in mind.
A classic example of a wolf making his home comfortably among the sheep, given that the pastor of his church is a pathetic example of someone who clearly is willing to turn a blind eye to the things that matter most to the Lord, such as protecting the flock, upholding justice, and calling out genuine evil in the midst of the assembly. And another of the twisted and darkened flying monkeys is a closeted LGBTQ-aligned deviant news reporter who has adeptly pulled the wool over his employer, a Christian online news outlet, by masquerading as a Christian, all the while having morals and ethics, including his true spiritual condition and alliances that are in harmony with the radical LGBTQ activist online news outlet, The Gay Blade. The remaining twisted LGBTQ allies have little actual knowledge of or personal experience with John Uler, yet they were driven by their own inner reprobation and twisted minds to join in the slime campaign because of their own darkened personal reasons of wanting to silence and cancel his strong, clear, and unapologetic message for the need to take a high-bar approach toward the protection of women and minors against those who would seek to gain direct access to them, to predatorily use and exploit them. And as if that wasn't bad enough, they even stooped so low as to use and exploit the emotionally troubled challenges of one of John's own adult kids toward crafting a very twisted picture of who he is as a person. It simply doesn't get any more despicable or any lower than that. Well, there have been a number of people who actually have personally known John Uler, who have elected to step up at great risk to their personal and professional reputations, given that the LGBTQ deviant radicals will inevitably descend upon and target anyone who dares to unmask their lies and deception, who have stepped up and stepped forward to set the record straight, to counter the lies that these deviant pro-pedophile, agenda-pushing LGBTQ radical activists and their little band of flying monkeys have manufactured out of thin air and have worked to push their false narrative about John. These ethical and brave individuals have stepped up to speak out about who John Uler actually is, both as a professional and as a person. To date, we have seen a close friend and former colleague describe the truth about John. We have seen former clients describe who he is and what their experience with him as their therapist has been like. And we have seen his adult son, Reed, take the time to make multiple videos about his father to describe the good man and father John was and is. And we have also seen that John and his son have begun a very inspiring series on encouragement for dads, where they, together as father and son, share memories together and offer encouragement and practical suggestions to dads to help them take their parenting to the next level. All of these personal testimonies and recordings can be easily accessed on John Uler's YouTube page. And now we have one more person, a very special person who has elected to help step up to clearly set the record straight about who John Uler is, to speak to what kind of professional he is in terms of his knowledge, his background and his competence, and to speak to who John is as a person. Our special guest has known John Uler for years now, both personally and professionally. She is someone who has actually known John as a friend and has worked with John as a professional colleague in terms of addressing matters related to the protection of women and minors from predators who are using the lie called trans to manipulate the public and gain access to minors. This special and distinguished person is none other than Dr. Elisabeth Taylor, PhD, who is exactly the right person to address the lies spun against her friend and professional colleague John Uler, given her professional expertise on the matter of the dark deception and agenda of those activists pushing LGBTQ and queer theory on our kids and onto society. So, it is a great honor for me to have been asked to introduce to you Dr. Elisabeth Taylor, who is an Australian-born professional researcher, a university instructor, and a sought-after speaker and expert on the subjects of the history of queer theory, the sexual revolution, and the influences that has been pushing the trans movement and the deviant and radical LGBTQ movement. Elisabeth Taylor graduated with first-class honours in history from Sydney University. She's an esteemed Commonwealth scholar and holds a PhD in history from Cambridge University. Formerly serving as the Director of Research for the Australian Christian Lobby and as Senior Research and Fellow at the Lachlan Macquarie Institute, and now as an independent researcher and writer, Dr. Taylor's has focused particularly on the modern political debates concerning sexuality and gender, including the history of sexual rights activism, queer theory, the transgender movement, feminism, comprehensive sexuality education and pornography, and euthanasia. Most recently, her focus has been on unmasking the origins and little-understood dangerous special interests, pushing the safe schools and sexual orientation and gender identity, sex ed programs currently being taught in schools around the world, in primary, middle and secondary schools, along with unmasking the historical roots and influences behind gender ideology and the queer revolution. Elisabeth traces the origins and goals of the sexual revolution to the fraudulent and deceptive sex research of Alfred Kinsey in the late 1940s, who oversaw the systematic, sadistic sexual abuse of young children as the basis for his supposed groundbreaking work into human sexuality, who boldly concluded that no sexual interactions between adults and children were negative or harmful. One of Elisabeth's research papers documents the many negative social impacts of widespread pornography consumption. She contends that digital revolution has enabled the easy accessibility of all types of pornography, sexualized content and sexual services. Elisabeth is broadly supportive of a recent parliamentary committee report that supports some form of age verification for accessing online pornography and sexual services. So without any further ado, I present to you Dr. Elisabeth Taylor.
Hi there, my name's Elisabeth Taylor. I'm aware that I'm probably mostly speaking to an American audience, but I've noticed my friend John Uler is having a bit of trouble over there in America, and I thought I'd just tune in to give you an Australian perspective on John and his work from what is now several years of my personal acquaintance with him. So I'm just going to talk to you for a few minutes and tell you what I know about John, and then perhaps you'll understand why some of the things that I'm realizing must have been said about him, they just don't pass the pub test. I don't know if you guys have that expression over there, maybe you have bars instead of pubs, but basically any sensible, rational person with any knowledge of John would just be rolling their eyes in disbelief at this. This is objectively absurd, some of the things that seem to have been said. On the other hand, it's not very surprising when you understand who John is and what his work is all about, and why there are some people that are probably not very happy with him for that. Whether they're the good guys or not, well, it depends on your perspective, I suppose. So I'll just tell you a little bit about what I know about John. John first came to my attention a number of years ago when I'm an historian, my background is in history. More recently, I've been researching the history of the sexual revolution and the transgender movement, of course. So one of the things, this is the context in which John's work came to my attention, because I had been looking into the history of the sexual revolution and noticing that a number of the significant figures that have driven the sexual revolution forward were also really interested in the subject of gender, and particularly in the context of children. I couldn't understand the pattern, but it was definitely a pattern. But it intrigued me. No one was really talking about it. And then I tuned into John's work because he seemed to be saying that the transgender movement provided a marvellous opportunity for predators to access children with their identities being camouflaged. There are a number of different things that he's unpacked for me since then, but that was one of the first things that got my attention because nobody else, as I say, was making the connection between the transgender movement and children and why that would be interesting. So I started listening to Jon. One of the things that I noticed was that he doesn't take the bait. It was really interesting to me because typically among academics in particular, when someone comes to you and says, oh, well, I've got a scientific study that says this, well, then you engage with the subject and you dispute the evidence and you look at interpretation and you engage with that subject as though it were a good faith subject. What I noticed about Jon was that he didn't take the bait because he knows that it's not a good faith discussion that these people are up for. So instead of when people came to his page and would say, well, I've got a study that says pornography is not so bad, or whatever it is, Jon would answer with something like, oh, I wonder why you'd want to come and tell me about that. What's your interest in pornography? And instead of saying, no, my credentials are bigger than yours, or whatever it was, he would say, what's going on with you that you would want to be doing that? So it was kind of fun because you'd see people really disengaging at that point and distancing themselves from Jon. So I was kind of interested. And I started asking questions because I had questions that nobody could really answer for me, and I thought maybe Jon could, and he did. He was very kind in mentoring me, giving me lots of time. I had lots of questions, and Jon was very patient at answering them. So I'll give you a few examples. There was this one guy who I tuned into. Oh, this is quite funny because it was back in the days when Facebook limited in Messenger. You could send messages like voice messages, but only for a minute. So over a number of years, Jon has answered my little chopped up questions in little chopped up segments. But, we'd sometimes talk for quite a long time, but in these little minute sound bites. And the time difference worked quite well. So I'd send my little message and Jon would answer whenever he was able. Often very late at night because I know that he works long hours, and I was appalled. I mean, we've joked that he should just move to Australia and then he'd be in the right time zone. Anyway, just to give you a few examples of the sorts of questions that Jon has answered for me. There was this one guy who I was trying to understand. He identified as transgender, and yet he had a really miserable view of womanhood and femininity and what it means to be a woman. So he was basically a misogynist. Well, he was explaining that misogyny is part of women's lot in life. Misogyny is just this sort of natural phenomenon that women get used to dealing with. Not my experience. And so he was saying that when he gets hate online for, claiming to be a woman, this just validates his femininity. Because, of course, now he can identify with women who experience misogyny. So I was trying to understand how someone who has such a miserable view of being a woman would want to be a woman and how this worked in his head. It seemed to me a very strange mindset. So I was trying to understand it. So I put my little question to Jon in my little minute sound bites. Hey, Jon, can you explain this guy to me? What do you think's going on here? He says he wants to be a woman, but then he hates women clearly and thinks that it's okay if people treat him badly. What's with that? And Jon came back with this beautiful little one-line answer, which was, they know they're not women. And I thought, oh yeah, duh. Like, I've fallen for it again. How foolish of me to not... Yeah. Okay, so now it all makes sense, right? So this is the sort of thing that Jon is really good at just sort of seeing through the blather and the nonsense and seeing what is really going on and laying it out objectively for everybody to see. I'll give you another example. There was this one time Jon posted on Facebook a video of a guy, obviously a guy, not pretending to be a woman or anything, but wearing very glittery clothing, long eyelashes, platform shoes, flary pants. He was very sort of kicky and free. And there he was, sat on some little chairs talking to kids. And Jon had posted this video with the one line. He said, this is the most sophisticated example of grooming I've seen for a while, something like that. So I thought, oh, right, I'm going to learn something here. I'm going to watch this guy and I'm going to learn about grooming and I'm going to observe very, very closely. I'm going to look for inappropriate gestures, touching, jokes that are like a bit risque, boundary crossing. That's what I'm looking for. I scrutinized this video, watched it really closely, couldn't see anything. So I watched it again, still thinking, this is the most sophisticated example of grooming? I don't see it. Like, what's going on here? It's just a guy sitting on a chair, talking to some kids. I don't see anything. So then I called my son over. He's a bit perceptive. He sometimes sees things that I don't. So I said, can you just watch this? Tell me, if you think that there's anything like odd about this, anything that strikes you as odd. So he watched it through very carefully, and at the end he said, yeah, no, can't see anything there, apart from like the whole thing. And I thought, oh, it's the whole thing. Of course, it's the whole thing. Here I am, I'm scrutinizing, I'm looking for little details, but it's the whole thing. So I wrote to Jon and I said, Jon, is it the whole thing? Is that what's wrong here with this picture? And Jon wrote back sort of laughing and going, yeah, well, why does a guy take time out of his day to dress up in flary clothes and sit down with kids and talk about nothing? And why does he video it and put it up on social media? Well, this guy is parading for his friends. He's getting kudos for this. So I thought, oh, okay, right, that's what's going on there. So over the years with my questions and his answers, Jon has mentored me in understanding a different mindset. And it's something that I never could have got from the academic journals, no matter how many I had chosen to read. And I'm really grateful to Jon for this because, and Jon has also explained why he disagrees with a lot of what is written up in the academic journals, because having worked in the prison system, he knows the circumstances in which those academics are doing their research. They have to submit their questions ahead of time. The people who choose to answer them and be interviewed are volunteer. And mostly, they're running a story. This is what Jon explained to me. They're running their story through these academics to see if it's going to fly for the parole board a bit down the track. Oh, I'm a victim. It's not my fault. I'll be good. I was a good person once, and bad things happened to me, and pity me, sympathy. And then that all, of course, gets written up by the academics in journals, and now it becomes authoritative, doesn't it? Because, it's written in an academic journal. So Jon has explained why a lot of what's written in the academic journals, because it comes from this very curated environment where lies are not detected, that he realised he had a really good opportunity in the prison system to study these guys, and the sort of opportunity that researchers would love and just never had access to, because he could tell whether these people were lying or not. He could have their room searched, he could check their criminal records. He was with them in solitary. Like there was nothing about these guys that he couldn't find out if he wanted to. So that was his opportunity to study the mindset, work out what sex offenders, or how they got there, what's different about them, how they think, and how they're trying to play people along, what they're trying to achieve when they're lying, first of all, and then what they're trying to achieve when they are lying, and how to tell when they're lying. So Jon's been just low battery. Jon's been just a fantastic help to me in just answering my questions very patiently. He had no vested interest in doing so. I was just some random person from Australia who had questions, and he's been so patient and given me so much of his time, and I'm enormously grateful. And my gratitude is not just in terms of helping me to understand intellectually, but it has had practical implications for my family and for our circumstances, because a number of years ago, when there was a person that we had befriended approaching one of our children, and my husband and I one day sat down and objectively laid out all of the behaviours. This guy didn't cross any boundaries, but we were aware on analysis that it was because we were continually having to block him and prevent whatever it was that he had in mind, and we were doing it instinctively, but when we sat down and looked at what we were doing, we realised that he was trying to get past us. And of course, you don't want to see that, do you, in someone who you've befriended? Like you want to believe that people who have nefarious intentions towards children, you'll recognise them instantly, right? Because they'll be hanging out by the swing set wearing a dirty Mac and looking like the village idiot. Like, we're going to spot those people because they're going to look like monsters. But what you don't realise, and what Jon had taught me, of course, is that no, they're very credible. They're amongst us. And the only way you can really tell is when they try and cross boundaries. So this was what we were putting together, all of this information. And we really didn't want to come to the conclusion that we were coming to. And at one point my husband said, let's just ask Jon what he thinks. And I thought about it for like 3 seconds and said, look, I can tell you what Jon would say. This is what we're looking at. And so I mention that just because I want to say that Jon's information, the way he's really onto something. And I'm so grateful that he's exposing the way these people work so that we can understand the behaviours when we see them and respond appropriately. It's not just academic knowledge, this is really important live stuff. And I can also understand why there would be some people who are not very grateful to Jon for doing what he's doing. One of the things I've really admired about Jon is that, yeah, he knows he's going to get the flack. Most of us just want a quiet life. But Jon will understand that he's going to upset some people by what he's saying. But they're people that should be upset, so he says it anyway. And I think we need more people with Jon's kind of courage. So for my part, I just wanted to say thank you to Jon for all that you've done, not just for me personally, but for so many people, as it turns out, because now they're all coming out in support of you, quite right too. And I'm sorry that you're having this trouble. I'm sure that you'll weather it and that it all will resolve itself. But yeah, I don't think these people know who they're up against. But I did just want to say that from my experience of Jon, these allegations, and I'm only sort of inferring some of the ridiculous stuff that's been said against him from the rebuttals from his friends and supporters, the many, many, many people whose lives he has touched in a positive way. I don't know how many of us could really say that we've touched so many people in a positive way, but Jon has, and I can also understand why, the people who have nefarious intentions are not very grateful to Jon for exposing their tactics. He'd be a great person to take out, and he's also, not in the limelight, is he? He's just doing what he's doing quietly, but doing some damage, I think, in the right areas. And I can understand then why he has drawn some negative attention. But in a way, that's a compliment that shows he's being effective in all the right ways. We just need more people like Jon. And for anyone who is put off by these accusations, I just invite you to consider objectively what you're looking at. You're looking at someone who is calling out predation, who is exposing the tactics of people of predators. He's helping people defend themselves. He's also explaining how, as a society, we are inculcating exactly the wrong things. By the way, what he says lines up pretty much with Ted Bundy and what he warned us about back in the, 80s. So that's really interesting to see that there are a few that, Jon is onto something in terms of what turns normal men into predators and into dangerous men, but also what inculcates this sort of superiority where they think they can get away with it. So what you're looking at is someone who's doing all of that, not for money, not for fame. He's not really being rewarded except with a lot of trouble. And then on the other hand, you've got people who want to attack him. And I think reverting to the pub test and some sort of healthy sense of skepticism, we should be looking at who those people are very carefully and why they would want to do that to Jon. Could it be that he's just very effective at what he's doing and that what he's doing is a good thing? Just put that question to you. I'm sure the sensible people of America will come to their own conclusions. So thanks for listening. Bye.
Hello, it's Elisabeth Taylor again here. I just wanted to add to the video I made a few weeks ago about my friend John Uler and to respond to the proposition that has been put to me that he is somehow speaking beyond his area of expertise, exaggerating his credentials, holding himself out as an authority when he has no right to do so. So I just wanted to answer those briefly and to again explain what I know of Jon from what I know of Jon. To answer, why should we listen to Jon Uler? The first reason that I would say is that he has a better evidence base to speak to this issue than most people do. I explained in the last video how he is critical of the evidence that's being written up in academic journals because it's tainted at source. The researchers first of all, it's based on volunteerism. They rely on the inmates to volunteer. They have to pre-submit their questions. The whole thing has to be vetted by ethics, and they have no way of corroborating the information that they're given in the course of those interviews. So this is not the case with Jon. He was in the prison system. He was able to cross-check the information. He had access to data not just on the people he was treating, but on prison inmates for the whole state. He could recede into the background while sex offenders spoke to each other, and of course they, have insights into each other's minds and behaviours that the rest of us probably don't. So he was clever enough to see the opportunity that he had and conscientious enough to make the most of it. So this is one good reason why I think John Uler is worth listening to. A second reason is that he is humble. So I have a PhD from Cambridge, which is only relevant to say that I've spent a number of years, rubbing shoulders with some very bright people. And one of the things that I've found to be a litmus test of people that are worth listening to is that they're humble. The people who have to brag and tell you about how great they are normally trying to persuade themselves. And the people who are really worth listening to, who have profound insight, don't do that. And John doesn't do that. A third reason that I think John is worth listening to is that he can tell you what he thinks and why he thinks it. And he can respond to countervailing evidence and questions and pushback with cogent arguments, which I find compelling. So I explained in my last video that I came to him with lots of questions, and I wasn't a passive student. I would, of course, challenge what he said. But John, that doesn't fit with this, or how do you reconcile that with this, or how do you distinguish between this thing here and that thing there? And he would always have a sensible argument for me, a sensible explanation, something that matched with common sense. So everyone will make up their own mind about whether he knows what he's talking about or not. But from my perspective, I can't see any reason to doubt it. It seems sort of silly even to have to say so, because it's not that he holds himself out as the ultimate authority on everything, but he has a particular perspective which I think is really worth listening to. So I commend his work to you, to anyone who's listening, and I'm grateful to him for having shared his time and knowledge and wisdom with me. So there we are. Thanks. Bye.